Welcome to this explainer of the source material. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we are going to explore the real, hard science behind measuring workplace stress. For decades, we've relied on simple surveys, just asking people how stressed they feel. But what if I told you that your brain's regulatory system often tells a completely different story than your self-reported feelings? Today, we're unpacking the theoretical framework behind the NPRO-8 mental fitness screening. We're going to look right under the hood of human performance to see exactly how stress load, recovery capacity, and functional impact actually operate inside the brain. So let me ask you this. Can your brain be functionally impaired by stress long before you actually feel burned out? Well, the short answer is yes. Absolutely. We really need to challenge this outdated idea that stress is purely a subjective feeling. It's not. It's a measurable physiological reality. By treating stress merely as a subjective well-being issue or, waiting until it becomes a late-stage clinical concern, we are missing the crucial early warning signs because our cognitive systems can show signs of strain and inefficiency far, far earlier than we might consciously realize. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. We'll be covering 1. The hidden cost of stress, 2. Stress load and allostatic theory, 3. Effort recovery and recharging capacity, 4. Functional impact and workability, 5. Probing the brain's responses, and finally, 6. Trajectories over single snapshots. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The hidden costs of stress, redefining the workplace problem. And this brilliantly illustrates the core issue in the modern workplace. We are catching the problem way too late. Look, if we wait for an employee to receive a clinical burnout diagnosis, significant damage has already been done. Stress exists on a continuum, right? Waiting for the breaking point is a massive failure in how we approach occupational health. If we rely solely on binary diagnostic tools, meaning you either have a disorder or you don't, we're only seeing the extreme late-stage outcome. Instead, NPRO-8 acts as a dynamic screening framework. Think of it exactly like a blood pressure reading. A blood pressure cuff doesn't diagnose heart disease on the spot, but it gives you incredibly valuable early-stage information about physiological risk long before a heart attack ever happens. Section 2, stress load and allostatic theory, the burden. So our very first pillar in the NPRO-8 framework is stress load. We are moving far away from asking, do you feel stressed? And instead, we're measuring the actual sustained demand on your system. To really understand this burden, we look to the theory of allostatic load, which was introduced by McEwen and Steller back in 1993. This is the cumulative cost of chronic or repeated stress system activation. What this proves is that stress isn't just an acute passing feeling. It's a measurable, cumulative biological burden. Your brain and your body spend actual physical energy regulating themselves under demand, and that effort leaves a biological trace. This quote from McEwen is absolutely foundational. Adaptive physiological responses can become damaging when repeatedly or persistently engaged. Think about it. Short-term stress is a brilliant evolutionary adaptation. It helps us survive, it helps us focus. But when that survival adaptation is engaged too frequently, too intensely, or for far too long, it becomes biologically costly. The very system meant to protect you actually begins to wear you down over time. So how does this theory translate into the workplace? It aligns perfectly with the job demands resources framework. When an employee faces sustained, high demands without sufficient resources or autonomy, it creates a measurable state of elevated regulatory effort. The absolute key takeaway here is that this burden, this stress load, is an objective physiological reality. It is not merely feeling stressed. You can be carrying a massive allostatic load while projecting complete and total calm on the outside. Section 3. Effort recovery and recharging capacity, the rebound. If stress load is the burden, recovery capacity is the rebound. It's our ability to bounce back and reset after that load has been applied. This pillar is built directly on the effort recovery model by Meisman and Mulder, which essentially dictates that effort expenditure produces load reactions, and those reactions should normally reverse once you've had sufficient recovery. This makes it incredibly clear that short-term stress activation is perfectly normal. There is nothing inherently pathological about it. The danger only arises when that recovery is incomplete, delayed, or just inefficient. And that brings us to this vital insight from Van Veldhoven and Brusen. They note that the need for recovery is an early indicator of trouble. The earliest warning signal of a struggling system isn't necessarily poor performance on the job. No, long before someone starts dropping the ball at work, their neurophysiological capacity to recover efficiently becomes compromised. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we actually measure it. We don't just ask if you took a weekend off or if you generally feel relaxed. We measure objective neurophysiological normalization. We are fundamentally asking, can your system stabilize while sustained vigilance is still required? And can it return to baseline after a cognitively demanding conflict? If your activation remains elevated or unstable long after the demand is gone, that's when strain really begins to accumulate. Section 4, Functional Impact and Workability, the output. This brings us to our third and final theoretical pillar. Functional impact looks at whether stress is actually affecting your task efficiency and cognitive functioning. And honestly, this is what makes NPRO-8 so practically meaningful. Carrying a heavy stress load doesn't automatically equal functional impairment. Some people carry incredibly heavy loads but maintain perfect performance. Therefore, we have to measure the actual output, the behavioral and neurophysiological performance under demand. This concept is deeply supported by the Work Ability Index, which evaluates the relationship between a worker's resources and the demands of their work. It's also central to the burnout literature by Maslow and the World Health Organization, which defines burnout not just as exhaustion but as reduced professional efficacy. Basically, chronic stress eventually erodes your internal resources until your actual ability to execute complex work begins to visibly decline. And this is exactly why a simple 1 to 10 stress questionnaire completely fails to capture reality. Think of the classic duck syndrome, gliding calmly on the surface but paddling frantically underneath. You might have a high stress load but perfect functional impact, meaning you're actively compensating, you're performing brilliantly but at a massive physiological cost. Or you might have a low stress load but poor function, which points to fatigue, disengagement, or even a skill gap rather than burnout. You might even have terrible recovery capacity while feeling zero subjective distress. These distinct, fascinating profiles demand a highly nuanced measurement tool. Section 5. Probing the brain's responses. The architecture of NPRO-8. Let's move to the table and see how this all builds together. How do we practically measure these three theoretical pillars? Well, NPRO-8 maps 8 brief neurocognitive probes directly to their corresponding pillars. The baseline load and vigilance probes give us the tonic neural burden. That's our stress load. The recovery probes test if the system can return to baseline, our recovery capacity. And then we test functional impact by putting the brain through conflict processing, cognitive flexibility, strategic integration, and uncertainty tolerance. These probes map the exact functional resources you need to do your job every single day. It is absolutely crucial to reiterate that these 8 probes are not isolated clinical tests. You don't pass or fail them. Instead, they provide a set of highly controlled task conditions. By putting the brain through structured ambiguity and conflict, we can derive the precise patterns of brain activation, recovery, and functional performance. We literally get to see how the brain actually handles real-world style demands in a controlled environment. It's a real game changer. Section 6. Trajectories over single snapshots, the moving target. So, the crucial point is that up to this point, we've only talked about measuring a single moment in time. But human performance is a dynamic moving target. A single assessment on day 1 is just a snapshot. A red, amber, or green score is a great starting point, sure. But tracking the trajectory over time, from day 1 to month 3 to month 6, is where the true occupational health value lies. A person might show a high stress load on day 1, but if we see their recovery capacity improving by month 3, we know their regulatory system is heading in the right direction. Tracking this motion moves us far beyond static classifications. If your functional impact score starts to worsen over time despite your stress load remaining stable, we have just identified a hidden performance vulnerability. We've literally caught a decline in your cognitive efficiency long before you hit burnout, and certainly long before a static stress survey would have noticed anything was wrong. Mental fitness is dynamic, and because of that, it absolutely requires dynamic screening. I want to leave you with this one thought. If mental fitness is indeed a moving trajectory driven by your invisible allostatic load, your hidden recovery capacity, and your functional output, what direction is your regulatory system heading today? Are you compensating at a high physiological cost, or are you genuinely resilient? Understanding the theoretical framework of NPRO-8 gives us the power to finally answer that question with objective science. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer of the source material, and as always, keep learning.